Welcome to Garage Ultimate. I'm Nick Deutsch. We are here in one of our owners' garages, going to talk to you about tariffs. And really, we're just inviting you into a conversation that I am about to have with Reggie Draper. Pleased to have you. Thank you so much for coming. And Reggie is the real deal. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
I don't know about the real deal, but thanks for having
he's
me
the real
here.
deal.
It's amazing as you see behind us. This is just a little of what I've seen, right? Anyway, Reggie Draper. I'm the founder of Draper Automotive, and I'll keep it simple. I try to find the coolest, rarest cars in the world and acquire them, keep them, collect them, or sell them. That's the goal.
And here at Garage Ultimate, when you collect them, when you find them, when you sell them, we like to store them and house them and make it the playground for the same types of individuals. So we're in sort of tangentially the automotive industry. We're not economists, not politicians.
Nope.
We're going to talk about tariffs. So I think it's important to note that it is May 14th, 2025, because tomorrow this conversation may be different. But so let's get into it. I mean, so tariffs, generally speaking, are taxes on imported goods. Mm-hmm. The idea is maybe to level the playing field or to benefit domestic manufacturers. We're not going to get into the politics of it, but that's what's been proposed. There was a directive that came out, I think, at the end of March. It said there's going to be a 25% tariff on all imported vehicles.
Right.
And so that's since been rolled back a little bit. There's been some country by country developments, and we'll talk about some of that. Also talk about what are the impacts that we're even seeing from those tariffs.
Now, it's funny because there's a misconception around tariffs. Some people think all of a sudden we have these tariffs that, on imports or vehicles or whatever. Tariffs have been here around internationally in the international trade deals for ages, right? In certain percentages, even before the 25% increase, there was a 2.5% tariff on imports of automobiles, right? So me as an importer, I bring a car in, no matter how old it was, there was a 2.5% base tariff already. So this is nothing new in terms of the taxation on automobiles or anything else. But it's very new in terms of a 25% increase, right? So that's a major issue in the entire value chain of not only buying cars, but selling cars, right? And so that's what we're up against, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
So somebody like you with historically you've been paying 2.5% if you bring a car into the country. Today, and let's assume there was a new 25% tariff. So now you'd be paying 27.5%.
Exactly.
So huge numbers.
No, massive numbers. I mean, and just keep it simple, right? If it's a car that's $100,000, that's an extra $27,000 on top of that vehicle, or really, I guess, an extra $25,000 if you include the old 2.5. That's a big difference, right? In the automotive world, as you know, like there's a range of, I guess, where customers expect to pay for a vehicle, right? Even if it's a 911 GT3, the expected range may be $20,000 to $50,000. Adding 25% to that is a major problem for most people, and many people are like, you know what, never mind, I'll stick with my existing car. So it affects it across the board. Now, one thing I think right now, at least as of today, the 25-year-old cars are exempt. As of today. Initially, they were not exempt. Today they are. Tomorrow we don't know, right? But either way it goes, it's a massive disruption.
So there's, and you touched on it with the older than 25 years. You've got the imports, you've got the domestic, you've got the parts. There's a whole bunch of different categories, mm-hmm. And I think, at least from what I'm seeing, they're affected differently. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of walk through at least a few of those categories. We'll start with. Let's just, a regular domestic kind of daily driver, there's a 25% import tariff that was announced.
Yep.
And then now that's down to 10%, I believe, currently. Is that right?
Currently has, and it seems to change every few hours.
Right.
So, to my knowledge, as of today, there is still a 25% import tariff in general on automobiles. But some countries or some manufacturers, like the UK, there was the trade deal happened a few days ago between the UK Prime Minister and Trump, President Trump, and the fact that now their luxury cars are 10% for the first 100,000 cars coming into the U.S., whatever that's supposed to mean. So it gives them a little breath, right, to continue to provide cars for us without having the impact of the 25% tariff increase. But as of today, to my knowledge, many the other imports are 25%. So Porsche, Audi, Ferrari, all those are still getting impacted. We'll see how that changes. I think we're playing. I think we're in game theory right now. I think we're playing some chess. So we'll see what happens.
There's definitely some chess. There's a lot of moving parts. The U.S. manufacturers, at least a lot of them that have the supply chain between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, now we've got trade agreements, now we've got reductions in tariffs, but I think we've already seen some changes in the supply chain, and I'm not a global supply chain expert either, but there's been at least some reports of, a single part, when you had consistent tariffs before, a single part might cross the border 6 or 8 times.
Right.
Whereas now they've said, okay, well, that's going to be extremely expensive. Let's bring that part of the manufacturing and keep it here. And so it's changed the manufacturing and supply process. Mm-hmm. What about pricing? We heard a lot about there's going to be a price increase, and then the numbers have just come out, really the inflation numbers, but there was a heavy look on auto sales and what the impact was. And I think the immediate impact was there was actually a decrease in sales, even though there was this threat of tariffs and maybe a potential rush to buy.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of pricing, we've seen a few different things. There was very similar to what we're seeing in the market itself, the volatility. There were a few weeks to where there was a decrease in sales, seemed like, out of fear. And all of a sudden we saw an increase in sales. So I'm not sure if that's fear of missing out. People are afraid the tariffs are going to hit them. Or whatever else, right? So we've seen a bit of playing in terms of that. And really, the biggest takeaway in terms of the idea of tariffs that we expected to see was an immediate increase in pricing across the board. We haven't yet seen that across the board. There's very, very marginal, right? So even Ford has talked about a few percentage point increase in some of their vehicles. Which is for many reasons, right? Some of these vehicles are within the USMCA, which is the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement. Some of them are imported in, but they're relieved around the taxes so much. But even some of the pure importers, like Porsche, the VW Group, Ferrari, we haven't seen the full impact just yet for some of them. Ferrari has announced 10% on ones that are in the States, but even some of their models are not being impacted by that. So I haven't seen what I thought I was going to see just yet. In the used car market, it's going to follow the new car market. So I think everything is kind of it's settling around based on the fact that we have not given most of the tariff impact to the consumer just yet. The corporations are absorbing them right now. They're probably really mad at President Trump about it, but they're being absorbed, right? And so until the customer has an impact, the supply and demand seems to be somewhat stable. But as we talked about before this, there's a lot of influences on that. Inflation being one of them, right? And that's not being talked about enough because inflation right now over the last few years has had probably the greatest impact on automotive price. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
You raise a really interesting point. We're seeing the same thing of if you look at tariffs in isolation, you can at least project what price movement is going to do, what the demand is going to be, but it's not in isolation. This is within an entire system, within an entire really global economy, and the supply and the demand really matters. And so while there's been this at least potential increase in the costs, they're not necessarily able to pass that on to the consumer if the demand isn't there. Right. And I agree with you completely. And that would explain some of the numbers. It's interesting though, as the numbers are coming out, Bentley is a good example. So Bentley's reaction to the announcement of tariffs was to export a bunch of cars to the United States. So they flooded the market to beat the tariffs. Now with the announcement that there's been an agreement and so the tariffs are going to go down, what does that do to the demand? Well, their CEO says this is a killer for demand. And now any urgency that had been created by the tariffs is gone.
Exactly.
And they also flooded the supply. So now that may be one manufacturer, or it may be something that we could expand more globally, but that's a problem. If now you've got a huge increase in supply and there's no driver for demand and there's uncertain economic time, there may actually be a decrease in demand. That doesn't allow a manufacturer to increase prices.
No, absolutely. And very similar to the market, consumers don't like uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, we start questioning things, and you're like, okay, maybe I should buy now. Wait, is it too expensive? Are prices going to drop? Like if say whatever, Mercedes tells me that, we're going to hit you with a 10% tariff or whatever the tariff may be, and I want to buy a car, but I see that every week something changes, I'm going to reconsider everything. Like I don't want to get hit with a auto loan or whatever that's 10% higher than it should be. So it just creates a lot of issues. And you brought up a good point around supply demand. I think that basic economic idea is the most interesting component of this whole thing, right? We saw in COVID similarities in terms of volatility, but in a different aspect, right? During COVID, you had this major constraint in supply chain. You had this initially decrease in demand. And with the issue in supply chain, prices were affected, but the supply diminished. And then all of a sudden it changed. Everybody got bored and started buying every car possible, and everything literally we're seeing today. I think a lot of the prices we're seeing, especially cars today, are because of COVID. So where right now it's a different case, right? You have supply chain is not so much affected in terms of the actual supply itself, but more so the pricing. Consumers are confused as hell, right? What are we going to do? And so, including inflation, right? So we haven't quite seen the COVID ramp up, but what does that mean in the next few months?
So again, we're back to it's ultimately still goes to supply and demand, and tariffs are just one factor in the overall supply and demand. But we shouldn't focus maybe so much on tariffs or inflation. We got to look at the overall picture.
Right, absolutely.
You mentioned used, and that follows new. So if my F-150, if a new one's going to cost $10,000 more, then it would follow that a used one is also going to increase some increment of that. But what about parts? Parts have been discussed a lot as part of this whole tariff picture.
Yeah, and parts is interesting because it's something we're all impacted by. But it's not like going out to buy a loaf of bread for most people, right? They pay for it within the service agreement or taking their F-150 to a Ford dealership. And if you don't track that, you may not even realize it much, right? Like, eggs is a big thing. Right? Everybody saw eggs because we all buy eggs. But the F-150 water pump, you may not see it it's not quite as obvious to you. But ultimately, we're going to start seeing that trickle effect again as OEMs modify those pricing structures. And what people don't realize is that the international trade scenario is very embedded throughout multiple countries, as you mentioned, across the border multiple times. So those parts that were X amount of money, $10, unless they're moved to a different location, may now be $20, depending on the different tariffs. I guess you can really say 25%. $2 a few cents more, but we don't know those details just yet. So again, if you're like a pure parts buyer, say you're a small business, and which many people are, right? And buying parts is a big deal. That's a major impact on you. If your thing is to modify Skylines, Nissan Skylines, or tune Porsches, and you're constantly importing parts, that's a problem, right? Small businesses don't have these massive margins. For the OEMs, they can hide it, right? They can hide it in interest rates and lease agreements and, just cutbacks and, unfortunately, cutbacks in personnel, which, Nissan is having that problem right now. Big issue. And I think we're going to see some major impacts, if something doesn't change in the next few weeks or months or so.
That's similar to my take. The parts market, it takes a long time for that to really impact new car buying decisions. It may ultimately impact insurance prices because really parts on new cars is usually from accidents.
Yep.
But then the collector car market, is a specific niche that's interesting. It seems like a well-sorted, already assembled collector classic would maybe increase in value because all those parts might be more expensive. Does that make sense? And might it be more immediate?
Right. No, it definitely, especially vehicles that are heavily dependent on that part supply chain, right? Especially even a Ferrari, classic Ferraris. I love Ferrari, but they break, especially the old ones, right? So you have to buy the parts, and they're not inexpensive. So, now again, it depends on which Ferrari you're talking about. It may not impact the person as much. F50 is very different from an F355, right? But in general, when you're talking about a part that's $6,000 for something that's comparatively $400 on a U.S. vehicle, and that changes dramatically because it came from Italy, that adds up to a lot, especially if you're in the restoration business or just a person who wants to keep their classic car, working smoothly.
Right.
All right, so I'm curious about just some high-level takeaways of what we should do as car people and what everybody else should do. So, question for you. Should your sister or brother or friend buy a car now, or should they wait?
I love that question. That's a great question. All right, so let me break it down, and let's start with it's a sort of daily driver kind of vehicle, just a regular car, and even there, I think there's a difference between is this your car is broken down and you have to buy a car versus, hey, I'm looking at replacing whatever I drive.
Right.
But my sense is I wouldn't make a purchasing decision based purely on the tariffs.
I agree.
Good. Okay. Good. We're on the same page there. We're on the same page there. I think if you need a vehicle, if your car just broke down, go buy a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't seen those big increases. You're going to be okay. If you're looking, you want a new vehicle, not sure, maybe 3 to 6 months. I would look at the economy overall and make your prediction more so than tariffs specifically, because I really think it's going to be a factor of if they can't sell cars, you're going to see discounts. Right now, you're already seeing some of the financing deals come back. Some of those financing deals could cost the OEMs $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. So.
Right.
So they're already trying it. Essentially, I don't know that I make a buying decision based purely on the tariffs. If you wanted to wait, I think you're maybe okay. Though I could be wrong. But if it were me, I would probably wait on a want. I'd go ahead and buy on a need.
No, I think that makes perfect sense, and I hate to always go back to the market, but it's one of those things in terms of making that decision. You should make this decision that's best for you because that's what you can control based on whatever your capacity to purchase a vehicle is. And I think making decisions out of fear is the worst thing you can do most of the time. Right? And again, no different from investing. I'm not a financial planner, okay? But I just like to talk about it, right? If you're trying to invest in a stock, doing it out of fear is not that great. What's your long-term plan for that particular asset, right? And in this particular instance, getting afraid and saying, "Oh, I want to buy a car now," and it's not a good position for you, just doesn't make any sense, right? We don't know enough. It's too uncertain in order to make a decision based off fear. So just don't change your current strategy. All right, keep it as it is.
I'm with you. All right, now let's flip it. And what if it's an exotic? What if I was looking, 2020, I was sitting at home and thinking, boy, I'd really like to have a Huracan, and then prices went up, and now I've seen them retreat a little bit. Should I buy? What should I do?
So the exotic market is different. Many of them, I will say, although they've been impacted as well, Porsche is the most consistent in terms of value, especially on the GT cars. But overall, the exotic market and the high-end luxury market, right, the high-end Mercedes, the Maybachs, the Rolls-Royce, the Bentleys, the Lamborghinis, Ferraris, especially the SF90, holy crap. If you're in that market where you're looking at those really niche vehicles, high-end sports cars, high-end luxury cars, the 1% type cars, you should really consider what the future potential of the future prices. And I say that not because of just the tariff, but because of the current state of the economy, which I think is the greater influence on that. We've seen over the last few years, really since COVID, almost there was a spike, like a peak in the downslope of values on many of those vehicles that were especially new exotic vehicles. So I don't see those vehicles slowing down anytime soon because of the transition of the economy, but also how newer cars are developed, the hybrid technology, and it's a new world for many people. So exotic, consider selling, but don't get mad at me if it's a bad idea. But no, I would say this, if I had an exotic right now and I was looking to sell, I would sell it immediately.
Good.
That's my answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you?
I'm with you. My concern is the same, that I don't know exactly how the tariffs are going to shake out. I don't know that anybody does. I think there may be less impact, and it's also interesting with just the perception. I mean, perception is reality, and the thought that tariffs are coming versus the thought that they're not coming.
Right.
But I think the driver is this. Is there going to be this recession that we've been talking about for so long? Because if it comes, it's going to be hard on the exotic market.
Right,
Yep.
right, absolutely. And there's one thing that keeps coming up from people around imports, right? And that's a big, especially classic imports. As mentioned earlier, thankfully right now, we're not seeing the 25% tariff on anything that's 25 years or older. But the question is, should people buy their classic imports right now? And honestly, very similar to the topic about the daily driver, I don't think it changes too much right now. Because they're not being impacted by the tariffs at this point, it's no different from what it was before, right? So if you're ready to buy that vehicle, I think you should go and do it. I think there's one factor, one variable that I would give a little bit more bias towards buying it, is because of the change in the automotive market in general and how they're designed. A lot more people are going to the classics. There's some reversion in the market as far as current designs and going back to ICE and synthetic fuel. So those classic cars that are non-hybrids and just raw or analog, as enthusiasts like to say, we like those cars. And if you want it, I think they're only going to get more valuable. So buy the import.
So you're bullish on the market, but again, you're talking about supply and demand. You're not focused on the tariffs.
Right. Yeah, it's supply and demand. If the tariffs hit, the tariffs hit. But what we do know is that people still want cool cars. Yep.
Yes. And you're right. There's definitely been a shift that we see, and maybe that's the big takeaway here is let's look at, not focus so much on tariffs in particular, but let's look at the supply and demand generally as we're making these decisions.
Right. Totally agree.
Great. Well, Reggie, I've enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot. I hope that you've learned a lot and have enjoyed it. Let us know if this is something you'd like to see more of, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.